his biggest knock is that he's a white dude.
Yeah. What you know there is that he's always going to bring his hard hat and lunch pail, and he's always going to have a high motor. You know
That's
what I mean?
This is
So,
a guy.
Look, if he absolutely crushes that place, Lord knows the train will be honking its horn the whole way.
yeah, you'll be honking something, won't you?
Yeah, the Dick White.
yeah. Sights and sounds and edges found. You will now get down with the underground, the Dynasty Underground. We are the show that goes to the depths of the Dynasty landscape. Of course, I am Trav on the ones and twos this evening. And joining me as we prepare for the NFL Combine, of course, the wise man Jax Falcone, fresh off a killer episode he recorded today of the Undrafted. Be on the look for that on your favorite audio platforms this week. How you doing, fella?
I'm good. I'm surprised I didn't hear a little hosting and West Coasting from you. I'm a little disappointed, to be honest.
Trying to keep you on your toes, but I will be hosting and West Coasting on this episode as usual. Can't stop it. Can't stop it. Joe, Mr. Kuvatakis, the casual one, looking dapper in the half zip this evening. I don't know why I always have to comment on your appearance, but I feel like you always look more sharp than we do because you're in the corner office with the view. How goes tonight, fella?
It's good. I have been West Coasting. I spent most of last week down in San Diego and Coronado, and now I'm back up in the Bay Area. So I've covered half of it.
Dang, there you go. There you go. I love it. We are West Coasting. This is a West Coast show, recording on one Tuesday night before the NFL Combine, and that's what we're going to be talking about on this episode. But first, make sure you subscribe to that YouTube channel. Seeing some really good success on the show and on the channel with all of the stuff that we've got popping there, as well as our other channel covering your favorite NFL team, Uncovered_NFL. So subscribe to this channel. Go check out Uncovered_NFL. They are at the bottom of our YouTube channel as well if you want to look for them there. And then all the social media can be found in that episode description. Yeah, guys, it's been a fun week. The tweets are flying right now as we prepare for the Combine. We see a lot of people in the fantasy space going to the Combine to cover it, which is awesome to see us fantasy nerds kind of digging into that sports media space. I am extremely excited to see these guys. Now, I know that there is a little bit of semantics to the Combine. We get really excited. The NFL does a really good job marketing this thing. Most of the meat is on Saturday this week, with the tight ends on Friday, quarterbacks, wide receivers, and running backs on Saturday. So they really market it towards people digging in, getting their popcorn ready on a Saturday and spending the day watching these guys work out. But are you guys fired up like I am? Like, this is kind of like a good marker in the off season as well for when we start to really get heated up in the Dynasty off season. So that's where it kind of holds in my heart. But Jax, how do you feel about the Combine and the steam that we're seeing in the streets right now?
It's like a national holiday, man. I mean, it's spreadsheet virgin, national holiday for sure. But yeah, we love it, right? I mean, there's something about it. I don't know what it is, but just seeing a guy run a 4.28 or something, or just there's an expectation to it, and when a guy does something, that can make him a ton of money, it's exciting. And I don't know. I don't know why the hell it's so exciting. It's hard to explain. Like if you were explaining it to someone, you'd be like, okay, so they just run fast real quick. You'd be like, okay, so what who cares, But somehow or
Yeah.
another, this is completely enthralling. So I love it.
Yeah, 100%. Mr. Kuvatakis, I know the Combine is also a big part of the process, as you've dubbed it. So why don't you tell us how you feel going into this time of year, and then maybe some of the things just kind of at a high level that you are looking for as we move through Saturday with these guys lining up in their spandex.
Well, first of all, I'm gonna answer the first question last and the second question first.
Like it.
Because I'm feeling a weird feeling this year. It is rare for me to feel any sort of prospect fatigue before the Combine, but there's an elephant in the room and he won't go away. Guys, Travis Hunter is fucking with us.
Mm.
He's a CB. He's a wide receiver. He's both. He's entering the combine as a CB. Now he's doing wide receiver drills. We just said last week we're taking him out of the wide receiver ranks until further notice. Then we got further notice. The dude's driving me nuts. I don't know what to do with him, and he continues to confuse us. I'm wondering like how good his team is that they've got me thinking about him, talking about him this much. But so that's the first thing is Travis Hunter continues to absolutely torment us. I said elephant in the room. Maybe he's just the elephant on this pod. I don't know. Maybe that should be his nickname.
Yeah, the elephant. Yeah, Travis Hunter, the elephant. I
I've
dig
never
that.
heard of him. I'm not talking about him. I don't care.
Fair enough. All right,
Until
we'll stick with that for one more week. We'll stick with
okay.
that for
Yeah,
one more
that's
week.
right. Yeah.
All right. In terms of what I'm looking for at the combine, it really depends on position. So, first of all, for every position, height and weight is huge. That's like
Yeah.
one of the main things because these colleges lied to us, these college programs lied to us, and aside from the guys that were at like the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Bowl, like we don't know how big and tall they actually are. So that's very important because it plays into so many of the other metrics that we care about. So running back, I'd say aside from that and their age, I'm mostly concerned with their speed score. And
Bingo.
to keep this as simple as possible, that's just a weight adjusted 40 time.
Yep.
So generally, and certainly before last year, my rule of thumb was, if a guy's over 200 pounds, we want a speed score that is greater than 90. If a guy's under 200 pounds, we want a speed score that's greater than 100. There are two glaring exceptions to this in the last few years. That's Kyron Williams and Bucky Irving. But generally that's what we're looking for. At wide receiver, size is actually really important. We care a lot less about how the receivers measure athletically. And actually, our friends Scott Barrett and Ryan Heath have demonstrated a negative correlation to wide receiver athleticism because wide receivers who overperform in the 40 end up, getting drafted higher, and they might be lacking some of the other skills that make a wide receiver good. So that's
Yep.
one that we keep an eye on, but for different reasons than you would think. Size is another big one. We've had Devontae Smith sort of break the mold for 170-pound wide receivers. Tank Dell was an outlier as well, but he's also been hurt 2 years in a row, like we talked about a couple weeks ago. So size is important. We're looking for guys to be, I don't know, I'd
Big
say
enough.
north of 180
Or
generally.
Yeah.
just say it this way, we do the anatomy as close to 6 foot and 200 pounds as possible. Like that's really that's Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors. They're all 6 foot, 6'1", 200 pounds. So let's just
Yeah.
go with that's the prototype.
Yeah.
And
And
I
then as
think
far as, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I think from there you have that prototype. And then when there's variance off of that, you're looking at usage, right? How are these
Correct.
guys used? Are they used relative to their size, whether they're big or they're small? So just kind of a point I wanted to add into that, where you can add another layer of context to that prototypical size is by looking at some of that usage stuff.
Yeah,
That's right.
and their speed is really simple. If this is more of a threshold test, where it's like you don't
Yeah.
want guys running 4.7s at the wide receiver position. If they're running north of a 4.6, they better be 195, 200 pounds, and if they're sub 180 pounds, they better be running a 4.5 or better, unless
Right.
they're Devontae Smith and they're an outlier of outliers that won the Heisman.
Yes.
Uh, Tight ends, I want guys 6'3" and north of 230 pounds, actually really as close to 245 pounds as possible. Burst
Correct.
score over 110, speed score north of 100. I'm starting to think that spark score is actually the best measure of a tight end.
Or RAS, right?
Yeah, or RAS. Yeah, relative athletic score. Yeah, I think that's somewhere in there. I need to play with those numbers a little bit.
Yep.
And then for quarterbacks, guys, I'm not going to pretend to be able to analyze quarterbacks from the combine. I just want them to be at least 6 feet tall or really fast, right? Like Kyler, I wrote an article last year and basically talked about how like Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson are the only QBs with top 12 finishes that have been under 6 feet tall. And they ran a 4.49 and a 4.55 respectively. So
Yeah.
if you're under 6 feet tall, you better have some other superpower.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
that's basically it. The
Yeah.
size is, I feel like, the biggest for so
Mhm.
many of these positions, and then that dictates, how we think of running backs and tight ends. And for wide receivers, we mentioned we're just more worried about them not meeting minimum thresholds as opposed to how fast they actually are.
Yeah, I think the athleticism for the wide receiver position is always counted twice by draft capital. So you might as well just let it go. And in terms of running back, maybe it gets counted twice, but it actually does matter. Whereas, a bigger, faster player is more likely to be able to checks notes, run away from defenders. Tight end is the one you said 6'3", 230. That's too light. Harold Fannon's too light. He
I agree.
needs
That's
to,
minimum. That's
yeah.
minimum.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, you need to be 6'4", 240 or north of that, and then run sub 4.7, and that's like those are kind of minimums almost to some degree. You're right. But yeah, as close to 6'4", 245 as you can get, 250-ish, right in that ballpark. These guys that are bigger, they really need to move very, very well. If a guy is 6'6", 6'7", 250, 260, I'm going to be looking at the agility drills to make sure this person can kind of move a bit. So yeah, it's really, as you say, application. We've got more of that to come because I know we're going to get there. But there's a couple of my very favorite players that I'll be watching very closely because, you know, guys like Harold Fannin and Trey Harris aren't the most favorite prospects across the board from the NFL intelligentsia. And I need to see certain things from them. We'll talk about that and much more.
Mhm.
But I mean, I need to see certain things from them at the combine that don't disqualify them going forward.
Yeah. No, I love that. And we will definitely get into some of those guys. And just for me, where I'm putting maybe more of a magnifying glass is kind of the extremities and the outliers is just kind of a catchphrase that I'm keeping in my head is so those guys at the extremes on the size. So guys like Tez Johnson on the extreme small, guys like Savion Williams on the extreme high for wide receivers and so on with all the other guys too. And then those outliers, like a guy like Brashard Smith, who's a converted wide receiver, again, Tez Johnson, who is a big size outlier, and those guys who maybe haven't shown us much until like their final year. So those are the guys who I'm putting more of a magnifying glass on. Some of these other guys, like talking about like Caleb Johnson's a guy that I know we're going to talk about. Some of these guys who are a little bit solidified, those guys we know that they're going to get the draft capital that makes us say we want them in fantasy football. It's these other guys where it's a little bit more 50-50 and we want to be right over our league mates where we're going to look a little bit deeper. So
Yeah.
I want to start guys with the quarterback position. You mentioned it, Joe. It is a little bit of a crapshoot as far as analyzing quarterback. It's the hardest one to get right, and the one that I've probably spent the least time on at this point, just because there's so few prospects. And it's like I said, it's kind of a crapshoot. And if I'm not an expert, I'm probably going to rely on people who are more in the know than myself. But we do have Shedeur Sanders not participating in the workouts this year, guys. I've heard some kind of rumblings that Cam Ward might not as well. I could see him not doing it, but we know that Jackson Dart and Jalen Milroe are going to throw at the combine. So, first, Jax, I want you to talk about what you think about these guys not throwing at the combine or working out at the combine. Maybe real quick on that, and then
Yeah, I
get
mean,
into your boy.
yeah, I think at the end of the day, I think it comes to they probably know that they're a certain type of pick. They've probably been contacted. They know they're top 6 or 7. Maybe the Raiders have said, "Hey, Shador, listen, you're not getting past us," or something to that effect. I'm not
Yeah,
saying it's that specifically, but obviously, I mean, at the end of the day, they believe they have nothing to gain and something to lose, which would be the reason that you wouldn't do something, which I actually think is smart. I
yeah.
don't like it because I'd rather see them all do stuff, and then it creates the even sort of measuring stick for all of them. In terms of Jackson Dart, I think it actually is an opportunity for him to sort of be the alpha there to show what he can do. He's really got some natural gifts. I think it's going to be a setting where he can excel. He may or may not. We'll see. But if he looks a bit more electric than the other quarterbacks at the combine, I think it can help him. If he looks like a leader, if it looks the part, I think people start to actually value that stuff, even though I think it's complete nonsense. But in some ways, it's kind of like, hey, a guy walks in the huddle and you believe you're going to win the game. Mr. Kuvatakis, damn well, Joe Cool was that guy. Tom Brady was that guy. There is a certain amount of intangibles that go with the quarterback position that we'll see on display. There's not much tangibles that we can really evaluate at a in something like this, other than maybe just some of the natural gifts, hitting guys in stride down the sideline with, frozen ropes. It's like, wow, I didn't know he had that type of thing, but that's about it. Dylan Gabriel, I'm looking to see how he looks too, because, we talked about him on the pod. How small is Dylan Gabriel? How well does he afford himself? There's certain guys like that. Like, I'm looking at certain things because Dylan Gabriel has a real amazing production profile. Does he look like he's out of place at this, event?
Mhm.
Jalen Milroe, what does he look like as an athlete? I think he can make himself some money by running like a 4.42 or something. People are like, dude, whatever. Let's just, right. If he runs in the 4.3s, imagine, you know what I mean? So it's that
Mhm.
type of thing where when you see a guy like that, you start to get a little excited, a la, Lamar Jackson, who didn't necessarily have some of those skills, but lit it up in terms of an athlete, as Joe already pointed out, with some of these guys. Hey, if that's his superpower, it's enough to maybe get him drafted in the first round. And if he does, all of a sudden he matters to us too. So those are the types of things I'm looking at.
Totally. And I think like Milrow is totally a guy who not only with his legs, he could be one of those guys who throws just a cannon of a deep ball that gets everybody like fully bricked up. Like every couple of years we see that guy. Like of course the Jamarcus Russell year. I think we've seen a couple more recently, but I could see Milrow being that guy. And I think Dart could maybe get into the quarterback one conversation for us fantasy nerds, especially if we're not seeing Shador Sanders and Cam Ward, because I've kind of been thinking, guys, and this is maybe a little bit off the combine tangent here, but Jackson Dart, like we've been talking about him and we clearly like him more than the other quarterbacks. I think we are rooting for him more than the other quarterbacks. And when I think about us analyzing for fantasy football and thinking about upside and seeing that this is maybe a weaker quarterback class and we have a hard time deciding on who's the quarterback one, why don't we have Jackson Dart as the quarterback one? Because if we see that his projected draft capital is nearing the back of that first round, obviously maybe he has a little bit of a shorter leash than those guys, but I think he is going to get a chance to start significant time for his team. So I'm curious to what you guys think about that, because I've been getting really close to steaming him up to quarterback one just from that sentiment. Joe, what's your take there and where are you kind of sitting? Because I know you've had him as your quarterback two. Not sure who's your quarterback one, but what do you think about that?
Oh, that's been settled for me. I think I've got Shador at one. And I do think that there is something to be said, particularly in recent years, about quarterbacks that are not participating in the combine. To Jax's point earlier, I think that means I don't think he's falling to the Raiders. I think, Shador is live for number one overall pick and or, probably isn't getting past three. And I think the same is probably true for Cam Ward, which is why he's probably not throwing either. So for the guys that are throwing, what that tells me is that there's some uncertainty about where they're going. And, at a position where it's so hard to analyze, I do think to a certain extent, we need to let draft capital dictate things a
Mm-hmm.
bit for us.
Yep.
In terms of Jackson Dart, though, like, yes, I'm rooting for him. I'm rooting for Shador too. I'm rooting for all these guys.
Yeah.
But I don't think he has solidified him, and I think that's why he's going to be there. But that being said, there's a lot of guys that participated last year, right? Michael Penix, Bo Nix, all these guys got drafted in the first 10, 12 picks of the draft too, right? So I don't think this year's class is comparable to last year's class in terms of like the depth of it. But that the fact that they're participating also doesn't mean they're not going top 10, top 15 in the first round. But the guys that aren't, you can probably bet. The guys that aren't participating, you can probably bet have already secured the draft capital they want.
I can also answer this question by saying, like, if everybody felt like Jackson Dart was the clear quarterback one, I think we'd have pushback in the opposite direction. We'd be like, I'm not so sure about that. These Shador
Right.
Sanders, Cam Ward types are pretty good. I think we sort of saw it as like, what's wrong with Jackson Dart? Like, why is he not, even talked about? I felt like he was as good a prospect as these guys. And then you hope to learn something, Trav, by the process of asking that question over and over again. You expect someone to say, well, here's the thing, man, off the field issues, da da da. Whatever the case is, then you go, oh, interesting. We learned
Mhm.
something about this prospect in the process, because I don't know all that stuff. But what we haven't heard that. So we're now saying we were kind of maybe right. Who knows though? Because
Yeah.
to Joe's point, he's saying we still don't know. We're going to have to let draft capital tell us a story. And then subsequently, there's a lot of hurdles for these all three of these quarterbacks to get over before they're actually a valuable, startable, super flex quarterback asset in our dynasty leagues, right? It's not over when they go one overall. We've seen busts Marcus Mariota, Jameis Winston, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance. Like, it doesn't matter. I mean, it matters if they get drafted, but that doesn't seal the deal for them. And so at the end of the day, we still have a lot to learn about these prospects before we can even crown one of them. So I think that's really what it is. We're trying to be, pragmatic. And then on top of that, I think ADP, hail to the king, Matthew Berry. I don't hate players. I hate ADPs. For me, if I have to spend a top 3 pick, I said this on my pod today after, I'm going to mention this. If I have to spend a top 3 or 4 pick for Cam Ward, but I get to spend a first half of the second round pick on Jackson Dart, I much prefer Jackson Dart. If they're both going at the 2-3, the picks 2 and pick 3, I'm not sure who I like better. You know what I mean? That now it's a tougher
Mhm.
question. And it's
Yes.
the same thing I would say about Tet McMillan, by the way, which I don't know if we want to have that conversation yet, but I would say Tet at 2 feels expensive, and I'd much rather have Emeka Buga. I just fucked his name up, but Emeka at the back half of the first round at that value. So again, it's not like if I can trade the 102 for the 108 plus whatever you get for that move and get from Tet to Emeka, I'm doing that. Same thing with, the 103 to the 201 to go from Cam Ward to Jackson Dart as it is right now. But again, so much will change. And I think that's what the
Mhm.
point is that Joe's making is as all those things change, we may change not necessarily our opinion, but our stance on where the value is, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting all around as far as to see how those quarterbacks shake out. Some other guys invited to the combine as well. You mentioned Dylan Gabriel.
Mm,
Of course, you got Quinn Ewers, Will Howard, who we've talked a little bit about, Riley Leonard, Kyle McCord, Curtis Rourke. And then people have been steaming up this Tyler Shuck guy from
mm,
Louisville. I think it's pronounced Shuck.
yeah,
The
whatever.
data profile is super weird. 2 years at Oregon, 3 years at like Texas Tech, and 1 year at Louisville. So
Yeah.
I've been seeing people steam him up like second best quarterback in the class type of stuff, which is
Tools.
wild.
They're steaming
Yeah,
up the tools. Yep.
right. So interesting. We might see some of those tools on display
Yep.
at the combine. So I think we can knock off these running backs here, guys. Jax, you talked about a little bit of wide receiver action. I know you are excited to get into these running backs, though. So we'll
Yeah.
save the wide receivers. We'll talk some running backs first. We kind of talked about all of that speed score stuff and the things that we're looking for, Joe. Just kind of off the top, broad strokes. Is there a guy or something that you are most eager to see out of these running backs at the combine?
I'd say there's 3 that I'm super, super interested. I mean, I could give you a list of 10 that I'm very interested in, but I'll go with my top 3. Um, Caleb Johnson. I
Bingo.
think I told you guys last week or 2 weeks ago, if he's in the 4 4s, I think he secured the RB2 spot in this draft class. I don't think he can take RB1, but if he's in the 4 4s or better, I don't know if that's going to happen, but if he's in the 4 4s or better, he's, I think, the RB2. Uh, Dylan Sampson, we were talking about him a little bit pre-show. I've been watching some Dylan Sampson tape, and I'm not sure how much this guy weighs, and I'm not sure how fast he is. But I'm super curious to find both of those things out, because if he's over 200 pounds and he's running, I suspect he's going to run really fast. He's going to get a lot more interesting to me,
Mm-hmm.
even though he's got some flaws in his play style, which I'm sure we can get into some other time. But he's just a little different. And then Cam Scatabo, who we've
Mm,
talked about a lot over the last few weeks, I think if he's better than a 4.6, like if he's 4.59 or better, he can work his way probably up to my RB6 in this class, right? Like that's the main thing he has to prove. And we joked about it when he didn't go to the Senior Bowl, that he's just working on his 40 time, because I think that's the bar he needs to chin in order to get into like a solid, RB6, RB7 in the class, and that's probably around 2 or 3 capital.
Yeah. No, I think that's nice. Cam Scadbo is going to be very fun because he's fun on tape, fun data profile, and it'll be interesting to see him here at the combine. Jax, do you got a couple, or do you want to kind of piggyback on any of Joe's that he's got there?
I mean, first of all, love Caleb Johnson. Love to see what he runs. Can we have the Cam Scatabo conversation here? Can we take a
Do
couple
Yes.
it.
minutes? I mean,
Yes.
Do it.
okay, please,
Absolutely.
because here's the thing. I have been marginalizing and being very mid on Cam Scatabo. I didn't Scataboo, whatever the
Scataboo. I've heard it go both ways,
Scataboo.
but I do think it's Scataboo. I just can't help
Scattaboo.
it.
Yeah, because it's
It's
one
only
O.
1-0.
That's right. But it's boo.
Let's ask Siri how it's pronounced.
Caribou. Oh, don't ask Siri because then we get a casual Kuvatakis mistake. But listen, okay, so I told you guys that I charted a few things that I thought were kind of important. One of them was missed tackles force per rush. I did so for the career and for the final season. So career, you could say, oh well, yeah, Scatabo had this sort of weird start to his career where he played somewhere else, whatever. But he falls second in this class in missed
Mhm.
tackles force per rush for his career, only second to Ashton Genty. He is also second, though, in his final season in 2024 to the same player of Ashton Genty. And he's pretty well clear ahead of them. Like Genty this past year has an absurd 40%. So, in other words, zero point 0.4 missed tackles forced per rush. He's making someone miss over and over. This is so far ahead. Just to give you an idea, like Caleb Johnson, 27, Travion, 25, Omarion Hampton, 26, Judkins, 22, Ashton Genty, 40. Like just off the charts. Devin Neal and Ollie Gordon, both 21. But guess what? Cam Scatabo, 35%, like
Mhm.
35, way up there. Cam Scatabo also, when I looked at yards per rush. And one of the cool things I did is sometimes the sort of raw number of yards per rush can kind of maybe be misleading certain offenses,
Sure.
etc. So what I also did was look at your average yards per rush and then versus other running backs on your team.
Mhm.
Cam Scatabo is 6.2 yards per rush for his career, 5.8 this past year. Pretty good number. We love to see six. He's towards the top. There's a lot of 6 yard per rush guys in the class, but the rest of the backs in his class were 4.5 yards a carry. He is
You mean
one
on his
point
team?
on
On
his
his team,
team.
right?
Did I say it
Yes.
wrong? Yeah. 4.5 yards a carry. So he is 1.3 yards per carry per rush, better than them.
Yes.
I looked at another couple of stats. Yards per route run, career. His yards per route run is 1.58. That's only behind Brashard Smith, who is a wide receiver, and Marcus Yarns, who's probably not going to be drafted. And guess what? Ashton Genty also at 1.62. So he's right there with the elite there. Yards per reception for his career, best in the class at 12.9. Okay, maybe it's just a little smoke and mirrors. Certainly the NFL scouting industrial complex is going to disagree with all these stats, and they're not going to like them quite as much. They're going to like all these chalky players. So I looked at PFF offensive grade final season. He is second behind Ashton Genty at 93.3 PFF grade for his offensive play. I just can't escape it. If he is someone that I will absolutely 1000% be looking at in the at the combine to see what kind of athlete this is. How big is he? There's people saying he's way shorter than his posted size. I don't know. I want to see how big he is. I want to see how he carries himself. I want to see how fast he runs, how explosive he really is. I tend to think he's not going to be able to jump and all that. I don't know. Let's see it. Let's just put him in there and see what happens. I am dying to see how he performs. What are your thoughts about all that I just spewed?
Well, I'm curious. This PFF has a pass blocking grade, right?
I didn't look.
Yeah, I haven't dug into the advanced stats on
Yeah.
running backs yet because I'm just letting the film wash over me, like I talked about, and then I'm gonna cross reference that with their statistics. But my observation on film is he was a good pass blocker, which means he
Okay.
can get on the field early in his NFL career. Impressive tackle breaker. I kind of half jokingly said, his patience reminded me of Le'Veon Bell. Like the
Yep.
patience part, like he as a player doesn't remind me of Le'Veon, but the patience
Right.
in the way he runs did. And then I took the thought experiment a little deeper and I was like, oh my God, is he going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler? And then
Wow.
I played with that thought a little bit and like him and Jalen Warren. it'd be interesting for them to go that route
He'd be a
again,
hell
I
of a
guess.
Steeler for sure. And,
Yeah.
by the way, last week, I think I said the particle acceleration chamber, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Well, the other half of that is, after I've done the film, is Marshawn fucking Lynch. He runs with a reckless abandon. He is very violent, but also, people say he doesn't have speed. He has quick speed. He just doesn't. He kind of reminded me of Kamani Vidal last year, where he would kind of break away and then get caught. He doesn't have long speed. Like he
Yeah.
doesn't. He's not going to run 100 yards faster than anybody else, but he tends to break into the second level and make some plays. Again, evidenced by his yards per carry and yards per reception. So I think he's a little bit faster, and that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that he runs like a 4.52 or 4.55. That would be amazing. That would be blazing for this dude.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think we're
Yeah. Yeah.
thinking 4.65, 4.70, which would be fine, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
and I'm sorry to keep going with this,
Go.
way more time that we'd spend on this prospect. But so when I take notes, I take notes on like actual individual plays, and then I take just thoughts that I think about while I'm watching their film, right? And my top six for him are impressive tackle breaker, willing blocker, good hands, good balance, uh, very good first cuts when the hole opens, and waits for plays to develop. Let's see here. And then, the other one is consistently falling forward. Everything I just said is stuff coaches love.
Yep.
It is stuff coaches love, which is why I think he's actually going to go higher if he can just chin that bar and
Yep.
get over a 4.6 or under
Under
a
a 4.6,
4.6
right? Yeah,
in the 40.
I agree.
Catnip for coaches.
Yep.
I think either way, we're going to want him in our dynasty rookie drafts too, right? Because if he performs well, he's not going to get so steamed in the NFL draft that he's not an affordable price for us. And then if he doesn't do the greatest, he's going to be so cheap that we want him, because if he gets an opportunity, we've seen that he's just a producer, right? He's just one of those guys that you can't necessarily put your finger on it, but he's just one of those guys that seems like he's going to be a producer if he gets a chance. And so I think he'll either be cheap enough that we want him on the high end and cheap enough that he's worth a dart throw on the low end.
Trav, I think he's going to have guys like, and I mean, in our rookie drafts, in your dynasty leagues at home, there's going to be players, managers who have him on like the DND, do not draft
Mhm.
list. And then there are other guys that are going to have an unhealthy love and thought of where he could end up. So, I think he's going to be a huge variance in league to league, depending on who's got those picks. Because if it's a D&D guy, who's got the picks where he's going, versus if it's someone who just loves him in the late first or something, I'm telling you, he's going to go all over the place in these drafts.
Yeah.
Again, unless he completely craters and runs a 4.75 and goes in the sixth round, then of course, yeah, it's kind of over and he'll be a third, fourth round pick and dart throw. But you get my point. Like if he just, like he says, chins the bar or does something more dramatic than that. Like he does have a flair for the dramatic. He's a hell of a competitor too. Like, so there's a lot there that I think he's not a bad prospect at all. I also looked at even 15-yard run rate. So career 15-yard run rate. He's pretty good. He's
Mhm.
better than Amari and Hampton, better than Judkins, better than Devin Neal, better than Ollie Gordon, better than Dylan Sampson, right? He's better than those guys in that metric. So it's just like, okay, he belongs, is I guess what I'm getting at, and it's
Mhm.
like he didn't play at a small school. It's a real competition, real situation, and really performed. So I think at the end of the day, the haters are going to have to eat it, including myself when I did some of this research and including watching him. I was like, yeah, it kind of fucking looks good. You know what I mean? Like,
He does.
what do you
Yeah.
want me to do about it? Like I think, Trav, we joke about it all the time, but I think his biggest knock is that he's a white dude.
Yeah. What there is that he's always going to bring his hard hat and lunch pail, and he's always going to have a high motor. You know
That's
what I mean?
This is
So
a guy.
it's a
yes.
guy.
This is
It's
a guy who's
really
gonna bring his lunch pail. That's right.
he's a guy, right? Um, yeah, I had another thought on that, but when we start talking about this
He
being a
reminds me of
guy,
Mike Allstott, to be honest with you.
yeah,
You know,
100%. Maybe a little Peyton Hillis in there.
Peyton Hillis I saw too when I watched
Yeah,
him. For sure, Peyton Hillis.
totally. Yeah,
Yep.
he's one of Peyton Hillis is our goat.
He reminds me of Wes Welker somewhat,
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe a
Yeah.
little Tucker Craft in there too. I don't know.
Yeah, totally, totally, totally.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Wait, that
Uh,
one's actually a good one.
yeah.
Let's go,
Oh
let's
man.
go.
All right. So, guys, like we could polish off these running backs. Jax, I know you had a ton on running backs, though, and I have to
Yeah.
admit, I got some work to do on these running backs. So I'm gonna let you pull out a prospect that you're super excited for as well.
Well, how about Bashal Tutin? Uh,
Mm.
Bashal Tutin is third on this list in missed tackles forced per rush, and third in the class, both in terms of career and final season number. He was second in the class in yards per rush compared to his running back teammates. Don't know anything about his teammates, so I can't speak to that. He was third in the class in 15-yard career run rate. He 1.29 yards per route run, like really good numbers all the way through, except he was like third worst in terms of PFF offensive grade. And I was like, wait a minute, what is going on? So I did ask John Lobb a little bit about it. You know, maybe he's just a little bit of a home run guy. Maybe he's going to run real fast. He could be a 4-3 guy, I hear some people saying. Maybe Bashal Tutin is more of a straight line player and not as nuanced. I think that's what we might see, although he does break tackles and make big plays, which is pretty cool. So that's one I'm kind of interested to see what he does there, and then what the reaction is to that. Not necessarily by the Twitter heads, but more so like just NFL, the NFL intelligentsia. Like you said, if he gets some draft capital, he could be somebody. But who knows? I mean, he's certainly exciting.
Yeah, I haven't done too much on him myself, but of course, friend of ours, Mr. Scott Barrett, been on your show, of course. Jax had a really good tweet on Bashal Tutin today, so I'm definitely not trying to bite his rhymes. Love his work. All power conference running backs to average at least 0.32 missed tackles forced per touch on 200 plus touches in multiple seasons. So they did that more than once, and these are guys over the last 10 years. There's only three names: Bijan Robinson, David Montgomery, and Bashal Tutin.
There it is.
So he's had some really good consistency as far as breaking tackles. And if he can add some of that speed you're talking about to that, that's a very, very intriguing prospect. No matter where he goes, really, like that's a guy that you're going to want to be grabbing in that third and fourth round. As we
Yeah.
always like to say, you're grabbing running backs at that range in your rookie draft. And this is a guy that seems like he has as high upside as any guy that might be available there.
I could go all day with these running backs. I think there's so many of them. How
So
about my guy? I'm going to go with another one then, because here's my guy, right? Ass mass himself, RJ Harvey.
I was about
Um,
to say RJ, so that's perfect.
let's do it, because RJ Harvey is like let's see, third or fourth, whatever. I'm looking at it real quick. Third or fourth on the list of broken tackles, missed tackles forced per rush for his career was at 30%, which is like, well ahead of most of these guys. He also let's see, was he number one? He is number one in the class in career yards per rush at
Mhm.
6.6. You could say, well, he was a bit of a smaller school guy early on, and they finally lately got, moved into a better conference. Well, he was better in his final season anyway. 6.8 was third in the class this past year behind Travion Henderson and Ashton Genty. Maybe his team was just opening up big holes. Nope, he was 1.2 yards better than his teammates. He Listen to this. In his career, he is number one in the class in 15-yard run rate at 12.2%. I mean, 12.2% of the time, he's running for 15 yards or more. As a pass catcher, 1.44 yards per route run. As a receiver, 11.8 yards per reception for his career. So, I mean, this dude is just the number one player in terms of yards per play. And you look at the schedule, I know he comes from a smaller school, but the schedule's legit. Um, and he was one of the best and you're going to love your boy at Caleb Johnson, number one in this metric, but turning 10-yard runs into 15-yard plus runs. So of all the 10-yard runs he has, almost 60% of them go for 15 or more, which means he's able to break dudes off at that second level. He is quite awesome. Breaking tackles, pass catching, you name it. RJ Harvey, I just can't wait. I hope he breaks the combine. I love this dude.
Yeah, you hit on, I mean, the thing that excites me most about him, you hit on the yards per carry, and we know that that's a flawed stat. But the thing that excites me most is the receiving profile. He showed it at the Senior Bowl. It shows up in the statistics. I have not done my deep dive on RJ Harvey's film yet. I've watched just the highlights. So I'm going to do my deep dive on him, but I'm super, super intrigued on him as a prospect.
And of course, according to Jax and Thor, RJ Harvey has a dump truck on him. So
Yes.
that's enough right there, if I'm gonna be honest.
When
Um,
you talk about, hey, one thing to remember too is like sometimes you say yards per rush is flawed. I agree, but you know that sort of 10 to 15 run rate, which basically nobody's blocking 15 yards downfield. Like I mean, yeah, sometimes, but basically, if you are able to get a 10-yard run, it could be a number of different circumstances to get one, but to get from a 10-yard run to a 15-yard run does take some skill. And Caleb Johnson crushes this class in that rate. But Ollie Gordon was actually pretty good at it, but RJ Harvey is right there with the best of them. And so I think he is a guy that you see some of the way that that stat translates. In other words, the yards per carry stat. Where does that translate from? It comes from him making guys miss at that second level.
I want to do a quick humble brag because you brought this stat up before the show, and I think it's a really fun one to look at. But as soon as you brought it up, I was like, I'm guessing Caleb scored pretty
Yes.
well on this one without having even looked at it. Tell the
Yes.
people, Jax.
Dude, yeah, before the show, I mentioned the stat. He goes, so Caleb's good at that, and Caleb laps the field. Like literally, most guys are in the 50% range. You know, over 50% is good. Caleb Johnson turns 67% of his 10-yard runs into 15-yard runs. Dude, Caleb is special. He's gonna be fast. I don't know exactly how fast, but I think he's gonna be pretty flipping fast. So I can't wait to see just how fast he is.
Yeah, I mean, one of my notes, I talked about this. I said he's an interior run gasher, and I said he's really good at getting from the second level to the third level. That was just my film note. And so just hearing you validate that with statistics gets me all excited.
Yeah, it is pretty cool when you have the film note and then you hear the stat that just matches up.
oh
Yep.
yeah,
Also, Caleb Johnson also has the perfect running back body for the NFL.
yeah,
Nick Chubb
agreed,
2.0, baby.
Yeah, he's got
agreed.
the
I
ass
69%.
like it.
mass.
Okay, guys, I am going to move us on from running backs because I think the wide
Okay.
receivers are probably the sexier position to talk about at the combine. But of course, we got prospects like Omarion Hampton, Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, Ollie Gordon, Devin Neal, Dylan Sampson is somebody that Joe has been liking as well. Those guys are all going to be there, and we're excited to see it.
I do want to say one. I want to say one
Okay,
before you keep
okay,
going. I'm
get in
cutting you
there,
off. I
get
see
in
you
there.
ready, but I just want to see Quinshon Judkins
Okay,
and his speed because I think there's a perception of him because he got caught. I can't remember. Was it the college football playoff or the national championship where he got caught from behind? Right. And so people's perception of him is that he doesn't have this breakaway speed. And I'm of the opinion that this dude's explosive as hell.
mm-hmm.
So I really want to see his 40 time because there's this perception on this island game, college football playoff game that everybody was watching that he's not that fast. And I kind of think he is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll
I
leave it at
love
that.
me some Quinshon Judkins. So I am in lockstep with you, Joe. Before we move into the wide receivers, actually, guys, I want to just mention to the people that we have some cool stuff going on right now with the undroppables. So, one of the big things that people are going to see is some updates to our Discord and to our Patreon tiers. So, we just want it all to really reflect the content that we're putting out right now. We have some new stuff coming and really excited to get that to the people. So, we just kind of want the platforms to reflect all of that. And as a part of that, I do plan on putting out some giveaways for the people. And what will be given away is some copies of last year's UN score. So even though I say last year, it is a very useful document to have because it has data for these guys from 2017 through to the 2023 draft class. And then a little bit later in the offseason, we'll be putting out 2024 draft class.
Bingo.
A little later in the offseason, we'll be putting out the 2025 draft class for purchase with a little bit of a discount going to our Patreon members. So just some stuff that we got going on right now. Keep her locked on the social media platforms. And if you're in that Discord, you'll see it as well. But we'll be putting some giveaways out and we will be trying to build the community around the undroppables. So we've started to do that around the show. And then we want to just keep that growing for the brand kind of writ large. And I think it's going to be fun stuff happening this off season. So
Oh yeah.
stay with us. Jax, Joe, I know you guys are excited. I am annoying the shit out of you in the group chat all the time. But but it's been a blast and we got a good team behind us. So shout out to the crew doing some great work there. These wide receivers, guys, because I did a little work on some of the data today on these wide receivers, just digging up some of the profiles and getting some high level thoughts here. Got some work to do on the film, but I got a ton of guys that I'm excited about. So, I mean, Joe, you mentioned it a little bit there. Do you want to refresh us a little bit on some of the big things that we're looking for from these wide receivers, and then maybe give us a name that you'd like to talk about first?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, draft capital is one of the best indicators. What we're not worried about is their 40 times, except if their 40 times pushes them to a draft capital that is inconsistent with their production profile. And I think that's the best way to summarize it. So we are looking for landmines, or the guys that are going to be landmines based on overperforming at the combine. I think, I hate to say this, but I kind of feel like wide receiver is sort of a solved equation, save for like 3 or 4 guys that we're a little bit more into than the field. We've got Tet, Luther Burden, and Emeka Ibuka. And aside from them and the elephant on the pod, I don't think anybody else is going in the first round. There's talk of Matthew Golden, Alec
Mhm.
Manor, and Isaiah Bond being, kind of on the fringe. And I'm not sure where they're going to go. They've got flaws in their profiles, but of those three, I like Manor the best. And I think from a statistical standpoint, their production profile standpoint, Golden and Bond are kind of like already feeling like it's being telegraphed to us that they're going to be the dudes that are overdrafted. So then there's like, who is actually the second tier if we think those guys aren't, right? And I'm super excited about Royals. I'm super excited about, of course, our boy signature undroppables, Trey Harris. And those are kind of the names I'm most excited about. And I kind of feel like the rest are going to be falling into the danger zone. And the danger zone being like pick, I don't know, 50 or pick 75 and later. I think there's going to be some obviously in between there, but that's kind of where the drop offs occur. Of the remaining field, like Jalen Noel, let's see if he can build on an awesome Senior Bowl. Jalen Royals wasn't 100% healthy at the Senior Bowl. Let's see how he looks here. And then, I've got a few more names, but I've been talking for too long. Jax, take it away.
Yeah, I think there's certain guys I'm definitely looking for. Obviously, so think about it this way. Like last year as a prospect, we were a little unsure of Brian Thomas Jr. through the process. Not unsure, but unsure if he was elite or not. And as a outside winner, we said, well, is he more, DJ Chark, Gabe Davis, or is he DK Metcalf, Julio Jones, right? And you're like, well, what do the DK Metcalf, Julio Jones guys do? They run 4.3s, right? And he goes out and runs that 4.3, and you're like, oh, maybe he's that then. You know what I'm saying? And I think that that's what's going to happen with a guy like even Tet to some degree, but a guy like Trey Harris, I feel like for his utility, he has to go out there and run fast. I mean, he doesn't have to, but it'd be a lot cooler if he did. You know what I mean? Right? Like that profile is dangerous when it's sort of not coupled with a little bit of elite athleticism, because in the NFL, you mentioned it, Joe, every time we saw Trey Harris, he's got a 12-yard cushion. Guys are terrified, right? Well, are the NFL corners going to be terrified? No, but should they be? Kind of hope they should, right? Like if he runs a 4.42, 4.38, you're like, dude, this is great. This guy actually has some
Mhm.
wheels. If he runs a 4.56, you're like, okay, well, how's he going to, is he really going to win like that? I mean, so that's where it becomes a question for some of these guys. It's not specifically that I need athleticism and speed for my receivers, but I do need it for the receivers that are going to utilize that as one of their elite or one of their primary weapons of attack.
Yeah, and I think he's a guy that, like, a good performance sets, like, crazy ceiling on his draft capital, right? I think basically, like, with
Yes.
what we know now, there's just cap on it, right? Like, maybe a
Right.
top 50 pick probably in that kind of first half of the second round, But if he has a good showing at the combine, I could see him being one of those guys that sneaks into the back of that first round, because a bit of a long strider, right? So I wonder how that's going to look when he is just running straight lines on the field. Hopefully it can be good because he covers ground, but you never really know what that's going to look like when he's kind of clunking down the 40-yard dash line there. So I'm curious to see that for Trey Harris and some of these other big guys too. Like that's one of the big things that I'm looking for out of these wide receivers, is kind of alludes, of course, to that speed score that you were talking about, Joe. How do these guys at that size move, and can they be more than just kind of a big contested target guy, more of a possession, maybe versatile guy at that size? Those are the guys that I really like to attach to, and part of why I really like Trey Harris. Of course, another guy that I'm looking at is Jaden Higgins. Been steaming him up all week. I actually even put out a tweet from Undroppables that this is a Jaden Higgins house. I am stamping that now. Kind of feel bad that I didn't stamp the Trey Harris household first, because we were a Trey Harris house before we were a Jaden Harris house, but we got multiple bedrooms in this house, and so they can both have a space to their own.
They're
I think we might
welcome
even have,
anytime.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. It's kind of
Well,
like a hostel, right?
and the thing about it though is that when we look at our model, draft capital plays a part. And so right now we're projecting things and we're having fun with it, and that's why in some ways the model becomes best the moment the draft happens. It's like then we can really release it, because then it's fully formed, because now we have draft capital that really finishes the number. Right now we're kind of playing with it. There's a raw number that the model spits out that I was sharing with you guys that has like Jaden Higgins, pretty high, but then you're like, wait, well, he's not going in the first round, so he's going to lose some of that steam. Is he a second or third round or fourth round pick? One of the things that, like, if we look at, I'll just give you an example for like Trey Harris. If he goes not in the first round, he finds his way. He's similar to. I'll give you some players that are going to be similar. Even Dante Pettis, James Washington, Deontay Johnson, Tyler Johnson, Diami Brown, these types of players, right? That now Nico Collins gets pulled in there, George Pickens, like there's certain players that you're like, oh, okay, he's in there. But if he goes in the first round, he's like, the model will put him near like Garrett Wilson and Drake London. And I'm not saying that he is one of these players if he goes in the first, and he's is one of these other players if he doesn't. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, the crowd he keeps changes based on where he goes in the draft. Same thing with all these other players. So the draft capital is going to really count, which is why, by the way, we don't count any athleticism in the model, because it's going to take care of it with the draft capital. Like if Trey Harris runs a 4.33, he's going in the first round. You know what I mean? Like, and so the fact that he's a 4.33 player doesn't, it doesn't matter, because he's going to get drafted higher than he would have if he ran a 4.55, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like that accounting for it once thing, like you were saying. We're
Yeah.
accounting for it in draft capital. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love when we're recording and I have a realization just from talking to you guys. I've been looking for a comp for Trey Harris just in terms of like stylistic play. And
It's
Jax,
Nico.
you said Nico Collins, which I like a lot.
Yeah.
But Trav, you mentioned he's a long strider. And it occurred to me right after you said that like the dude he kind of reminds me of is early career Josh Gordon.
Mhm.
Ooh, yeah.
Not got suspended and was a train wreck after that, but like that breakout season, like the way he runs and the way he looks, where it's like, wait, is this dude fast? And then you look at him, it's like, I think he's fast as hell, but he doesn't look that fast. So his 40 time is going to be super telling, because with these long striders, it's really deceptive, but you can tell how far people play off of him, how fast he is. Not to mention all the other underlying metrics. Like it tells you a story there about his athleticism, but it doesn't look it when you watch it, but you can see it's there by the way they
Totally.
play him.
Absolutely. Okay, can we talk? We're gonna have the conversation, and it's about a guy who is like, I'm pretty sure Coder said a direct model comp for Trey Harris. And that would be Tiny Tez Johnson. Because I was digging into the data profile today, guys, and like originally I was looking at the size, didn't really know the data too well. I'm a little bit more intrigued now. It's a bit of a new NFL, and I'm not trying to switch gears and say that I'm automatically saying he's going to succeed, because I'm absolutely not, because he would be one of the most ultimate outliers that we have ever seen. But like some of the stuff pops off, and I can see why the model likes Tez Johnson, guys. Like his yards after the catch per reception was over 7 every single season. His average depth of target wasn't that great, but he made the most of it. He had an 11 yard average depth of target season 1 year before coming to Oregon, and then coming back to Oregon, it went down to earth. Yards per route run, 3.5 in his last year at Troy, 3.45 in his first year at Oregon, and then 2.6 this past year. Remember, he had Bo Nix, his like family member, basically as his quarterback the year before this past one. And then he's 10th in the class in yards per route run versus man at 2.83, and 7th in the class in yards per route run versus zone at 2.28 this past year. So I know he would be an outlier, and, definitely rookie draft cost is going to be pivotal in whether I'm going to be super in on him. But I think he could be a guy that excites us at the combine. And some of these numbers are kind of popping for me, guys. So I don't know. Like, have you guys looked deeper and maybe seen a little bit more on Tez, or maybe you saw a final nail in his coffin? Whoever has a strong stance, just take it away.
My stance is I'm absolutely terrified. The yards per route run, the yak per reception, and the targets per route run for the career are all amongst the best in the class. He hit the threshold on PPR points per game for his career. He's good at missed tackles force. He checks every box except for like ADOT on his career. But I can't get out of my head, one, the 156 pounds at the Senior Bowl and how just terrifying that's Tutu Atwell weight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then two, I can't get out of my head in these one-on-one drills where they are designed for him to actually just absolutely smoke these guys, and he was taking 7 steps to make his move, right?
Yeah.
That's not going to happen in the NFL. So that's why his career ADOT was so low, because they weren't having him. How do I frame this? This is projecting a little bit based on small sample size, and I do need to watch the film, but I suspect he's not really going to be able to beat press, and he's going to take too many steps, and that other stuff isn't going to matter once he gets to the NFL.
Let me help you out here,
Okay,
because we were going to have the conversation. We can have it right now, Joe and Trav.
let's do it.
At some point, you just stop drafting wide receivers in this rookie draft, and
Yes.
just
Mm-hmm.
draft running backs, or trade the pick away, or draft maybe a quarterback or a tight end. But like, there's no sense in every draft. Joe, maybe you'll do the research on this, but you started to dig in a little bit. The players picked after pick 50 or before pick 50, the hit rate is like just astronomically different, of course. I know that sounds sort of obvious, but there is a pretty strong line of demarcation there where it's like, dude, it gets real ugly real fast. Our model itself is only going to have one player in the tier of, unless Trey Harris goes round one, then there'll be two players. But I don't think he is, actually, and I think he's going to fall into that second bucket. The only player that's going to fall into the sort of elite bucket, if you will, or the bucket of kind of can't miss, is Emeka Egbuka. And I think that's right. Like, he is the only can't miss. Everybody else has flaws in there. Ironically, the model did that. Even Tet is not in that can't miss. He's closer to Nico Collins, T. Higgins as a as a number, which draws in some other guys. Now I'm okay, of course, taking Tet because he's going to be drafted in the top. But at some point, maybe it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these wide receivers, not 10, not 10,
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
a
Correct.
few of
Yeah.
them. Then we stop drafting them and we turn our attention to Bashal Tutin and Jordan James and Trevor Etienne and whoever the hell, Damian Martinez, etc.,
Yes.
etc., etc. No matter almost where they land. And that sounds so painful. I know we'd rather take a shiny toy than someone parked at the RB3 in New Orleans, but that's what you got to do.
100%. And I think I've got a good way to illustrate this where, I was watching, I sampled 5 Woody Marks games today. And I was sitting there watching Woody Marks and I was like, dude, this guy is a good running back, right? Like he does everything well. He's patient, and then he has a very decisive cut, and just all these things that I'm tracking and looking for, and these traits that I'm looking for. And I was like, this guy profiles like a top 10 back in the class, just thinking what a typical class looks like. And then I started looking at the other running backs in the class, and I was like, well, he's not better than that guy. He's not better than that guy. And I'm like, oh man, maybe he's like the running back 12.
Right.
Maybe he's the
Maybe.
running back 13. That's we're already we're a round into players before we hit on a Woody Marks, who I'd much rather have. Right. And
Yeah.
Correct.
so that's going to be a late second or early third round pick.
Yep. And you still
Mhm.
haven't talked about, Gunnar Helm or
Yeah.
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 Oronde
We're not even talking about
Oronde
the
Gadsden
deep tight end class.
or Mason Taylor, who I don't even love, but and then Dylan Gabriel, and I mean, I do think that the depth of the class is in the running back position. So why draft deep other positions? Just draft the deep running backs because you're more likely to hit the Bucky Irving and the Tyrone Tracy and the whatever else in a running back class that, look, who else knows it's a deep running back class? Everybody, including NFL coaches and GMs, right?
Yeah.
And so if they get one of these guys, they'll be like, I think this guy's supposed to be good. Like even a dummy like, Joe Shane in New York would be like, I think this guy's supposed to be good. His son will tell him it's a deep running back class.
Mhm. And he
You
won't
guys,
listen.
yeah, you get the drift. But you
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? Like there's a certain sort of consensus that is true. And who knows if that consensus actually kind of propels a guy over a guy. Like I was hearing, I think Devin Neal got mocked to Arizona in the A to Z mock that Scott Connor and Shane did, and they were talking about like Devin Neal versus Trey Benson in that situation, how disgusting that is. And I'm like, it's true, super disgusting landing spot. I hate it. It's awful. But like, I wonder if they have a situation like that. If it's like, well, Devin Neal's part of this class. He's now the RB2 there. It's like, what splits the difference? It could be this perception that this is such a dope class that they just get elevated even above their sort of their the Peter principle situation. Yeah, it's possible, man.
Yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy when you compare it to last year, which was one of the deepest wide receiver classes ever, right?
Right.
And where we were pushing guys like Tyrone Tracy and Ray Davis to like the halfway point of the third round or later, or fourth round picks in
Yes.
some instances. That's what we're doing with these receivers this year, right? That's where we're
Mhm.
taking these receivers this year. The guys that are outside of that top 5 to 7, let's say, generously, depending on how this weekend in the draft go.
Right.
Yep.
That's what we're doing with these guys. And we are hammering running back those first 3 rounds. We're hammering tight end. And if you need to, we're going to take a quarterback, right? But that's, I think, how it's going to play out and
Yeah.
should, frankly.
Mhm.
Or trade the pick.
So why don't we switch a little?
Trading back is always the answer.
Yeah.
It really is. It really is
Especially
more
in a
accurate.
class that's as deep as this one.
Trade the pick.
And
Yeah.
the top end talent isn't that great unless you got like number 1 or 2.
Yeah. If you don't
Trading
love the
back is
running
smart.
back that you're about to draft and you're thinking about drafting Tez Johnson, trade the pick.
Yeah, nailed it. Absolutely nailed it. So why don't we switch the gear a little bit on these wide receivers? Because I still want to talk just a couple of names, but I
Okay.
was digging into some data profiles and I have some kind of like under the radar names that I've been kind of liking a little bit, if that's cool, guys. You
Yeah.
guys can throw out some top of the list names if you want to talk about those guys. But 2 names that I've been looking at are Ja'Cory Brooks and Ty Felton. And
Mhm.
definitely way off the radar. But I've been kind of liking what I've been seeing. I haven't watched any tape on Ja'Cory Brooks, watched a little bit of Ty Felton, and I liked it. So Brooks was a 5-star recruit. He's 6'3", 195. We like that size. In his high school class, he was the number 2 wide receiver behind Emeka Egbuka. He went to Alabama, and didn't pan out there, but then went to Louisville last year, 3 seasons in Alabama. You were talking about Jack Besh and what he did at LSU in that 1 year that he played there. In 2022 at Alabama, in what we know is a great depth chart, Ja'Cory Brooks was 3rd in receptions with 39, 2nd in receiving yards with 674, and 1st in receiving touchdowns with 8. And so this is a guy, and I kind of am intrigued by those guys who are highly touted and then fall off. Like Ollie Gordon is a guy that I'm attaching to because of the hype he had, and he's kind of post hype now. Ja'Cory Brooks is kind of like low end of that, of course, but he's a guy that I think I might be interested in just for a little bit of that. I know we got burned by one Jermaine Burton last year on a similar sentiment, but I'm always down to take these guys if they're cheap enough. I know we're not necessarily drafting wide receivers at that range, and Ja'Cory Brooks might not even be a guy that we have to draft in our rookie drafts, but definitely a taxi squad flyer depending on where he goes and what he does. And I wonder how that Alabama pedigree that he has being drafted there as a 5-star recruit helps his draft capital, because we kind of see that happen with some of these guys. I don't know if there's knuckleheadedness that's involved in that as well, why he left Alabama. I'm not sure on the pulse of that. But he's a guy that I'm kind of liking. Any thoughts on him? Any digging into Ja'Cory Brooks?
I was just gonna say I have not dug into Ja'Cory Brooks because of the conversation we just had, which is I'm
Right.
kind of disinterested after
Yeah.
these top 7 guys, and I'm spending all my time on running backs.
No, it's
I
true.
think what I'm
I will say though, Trav, when I was early doing the, just asking questions, I think it was even during the season, I was asking Felix. I had Felix on during the season, like late in the year, and I was asking about players, and I was asking about all these wide receivers because we weren't sure
Mhm.
who the hell, how do I know, and I think he was pretty good. He ended up with 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, so he was pretty good. I mean, 2.57 yards per out run. He has a 14.1 career ADOT. So he does go down the field and make plays. He was about 70% catch rate on contested targets this year. So yeah, he was really good. And so he might be good. And, yeah, I certainly like Ja'Cory Brooks as much as I possibly could for knowing nothing about him.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
him and Ty Felton both don't have red flags in their profiles. I'm looking at my binary threshold test, which is like, I don't know, becoming a meme in my head. I keep saying
Yes.
it, but neither of them have glaring red flags. So I don't have a huge issue with either of them. And of the two, I'm more interested in Ty Felton. But
Same.
anyways, Trav, go ahead. Tell us what you like.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think basically just what I'm trying to do there is like some of these guys are going to end up on our rosters, right? And there are the odd guys every few years who come in and they are a viable piece of our team as like one of those wide receiver threes who can stick as a late round guy. And so I think while we are being cautious about where we take those guys in our rookie draft, if some of these guys end up on our rosters, definitely want to make sure we know the guys that we want to attach to and we don't want to attach to. And so these are a couple of guys that I'm looking at. Ty Felton quietly, well, maybe not quietly, I have no clue, but second most targets in the FBS last year behind Nick Nass, which was we know the guy can take a big workload as a wide receiver. 6'2", 186. We don't mind that whatsoever.
Yeah,
And
dominator rating of 38.4 on his
yeah,
career, which is a very good number, just shy of the PPR points per game that I'm looking for on said test. I like him quite a bit from a statistical profile. Not like he's not upper echelon, but he's in that middle class. I mean, let me put it this way: he compares in my test to like a Jalen Noel, who's much more highly touted. He
I
also
was going to say
compares
though,
favorably to a Matthew Golden, who is also much more highly touted.
I was
So
going to say Jalen Noel though, man. We saw the score, the model loved Jaden Higgins, and I went out and I watched some Jaden Higgins. I was like, I need to watch this guy. I was excited to watch him, and he's pretty good. He's actually a pretty skilled receiver. But in doing so, I was like, well, while I'm here, why don't I watch this Jalen Noel or Jalen Knoll or whatever the kids call him these days?
way more festive to go with Noel.
Thank you. So Jalen Noel was exploding off the line. Like this
I'm
dude
so
is
glad you said this. I'm so
dude.
glad you said this. I had the exact same
He's
experience. Keep going.
awesome.
Keep
The
going.
right? Like, so, like, everybody takes off, on the snap count. And it's like he's 3 yards further downfield after 5 steps than anybody. You're like, whoa! He just explodes off the ball and makes himself available downfield. But he's also a slot maven. Like this dude
Mhm.
actually looked really, really good. Like if you're gonna get me excited about a player that's not in the top whatever we want to call it, I understand where Thor Nystrom was coming from when he said on my program that he thinks he could be a first round pick. Just because when you watch him, you're like, wow, this is a special mover. He also has a little bit of that ass mass. He has a good lower body anchor, so he's strong enough to break tackles. I mean, Jalen Noel was very, very impressive. What were your thoughts, Joe?
The note that I made, because I looked at some Higgins film after I saw some of these preliminary model scores, I was like, all right, I got to spend some actual time on this guy. And I had the exact same experience. I was watching the tape and I was like, bro, number 13 looks dope. Who is number 3?
13.
Oh, it's Jalen Noel. Right. So I was enjoying the hell out of that. And I had kind of flashbacks to watching Odunze film last year and then seeing McMillan popping off the page to me as well, right? So it's similar in that, like, or like, when I was watching a Malik Neighbors film and I kept seeing Brian Thomas, right? I was like,
Right.
well, let's not forget about this other dude because he's pretty
Yes.
dope, right?
Yes.
And that was exactly my experience, and I'm super glad you said that.
Yep.
Yep. So it's safe to say that the Dynasty Underground podcast will be drafting the Iowa State teammates rather than the Texas teammate wide receivers that we
Yes.
have in Isaiah Bond and Matthew Golden. So yeah, I'm in the same camp too. I think Jalen Noel is different than Jaden Higgins, but they're both so dope at what they do. And Jalen Noel was really unlocked this past season with Iowa State from his previous like lower A dot role. A
True.
huge increase in that, and we saw that in his production. So yeah, unlock him, let him go. It's
Yes.
gonna be sick.
Yes.
Joe, you got a wide receiver under the radar that you might take a flyer on if the opportunity arises?
If we're talking late in the draft, I talked about him last week, but I do like me some Ricky White. I did dig a little bit into the film, and I'm like, betraying myself because I'm like, I'm not gonna watch wide receiver film yet. I'm gonna focus on these running backs. But I couldn't help it after I uncovered Ricky White last week. I watched him, and honestly, I was like a little bit underwhelmed. A little bit underwhelmed on film,
Damn.
and then I was reading up on him in the Shrine Bowl, and it sounds like he had a really good day one and kind of was inconsistent thereafter. So I think he's going to find his place as a special teamer, but this is like what I'm saying. Even the guys that check a lot of the boxes here, they're probably not going to be anything. So we should be focusing our effort this year more than ever on the running backs and the tight ends.
Yep.
Yeah. Are you sure you were watching Ricky, or was that maybe Richard? Maybe Dick?
Yeah.
Oh, it was actually Ricardo White the
Oh,
third.
shoot. They're Latino, brother. I like it.
He was just focused on Dick White.
Yeah. Yeah, all about it. Let's talk about these tight ends, guys, because
Yep.
I think there is two in particular that their athletic measurements might pop off the page. Let's just get right into it and not waste any time,
Yeah.
because I think these two guys are going to be the diamonds amongst a group of hard hat and lunch pail guys, let's say. And that would be Elijah Arroyo and Harold Fannin. I just think like some of the athleticism that we could see from these guys, some of the speed that we could see, some of the drills might be kind of fun as well, could make them really stand out amongst this class and in turn raise their draft capital and then our confidence in their ability to snag a role early in their NFL career. I know that we like both of these guys at varying levels. Harold Fannin maybe to the moon a little bit more than one Elijah Arroyo, but Jax, as the conductor of the Harold Fannin Express,
Yeah.
what do you think about that? Do you think he is one of those guys that can stand out because of that, even despite maybe the size leaving a little bit to be desired?
I think Harold Fannin has the most to lose and the most to gain here at the NFL Combine at the tight end position because he's unknown. The thing we do know is his production profile is off the charts. The thing we do know is that he played a lower level of competition. He can't shake either of those two things. I mean, one is good, one is bad. He can't shake that he's 6'3". He's not going to all of a sudden show up and be 6'5", 250. Like, that's not happening. So, will he try and weigh in at 242 or something, or, eat a few cheeseburgers, forget to shit for a couple of days and get in there and be a heavy, 240 something? Maybe, but either way, we kind of know he's a little bit on the undersized spectrum, which is fine. But Joe mentioned on the outset, speed score is most important, not raw speed. And because if he's light, he's going to have to run even faster to prove his worth at the next level, in order to be elite. Otherwise, he's just, I mean, what's the kid for the Tennessee Titans? I'm drawing a blank. The tight end,
Chigakonkwo.
Chig, right? Chig's cool. You're Chigakonkwo. Good for you, but that doesn't do it. We're not drafting Chigakonkwo at the 1-2 turn of fucking dynasty rookie draft, right? So we need to do our homework here and make sure that he is who he says he is, or who we hope he is. And then the NFL is going to double down on that and give us our answer. I remember when Albert O fell, and I was like, what's wrong with Albert O? And something other than what's going to be wrong with Harold Fannin if he falls, probably, because I think he was a knucklehead, probably, is what I think about Albert O. Nonetheless, he was a size-adjusted speed demon, whatever. The NFL tells us, like, Albert O was like the 8th or 9th tight end drafted in that class. If Harold Fannin falls to the late 3rd and is the 5th, 6th, 7th tight end taken off the board, we've got some problems. So I
Yeah.
think it starts this weekend, where if he can run and move, and if his RAS score is high enough where it's like, dude, this is a legit mover. We heard it from Thor, that his deceleration, acceleration. So if he can dominate some of the 3-cone and the jumps or whatever, like if he runs close to a 4.7 and maybe he's not that fast, but he's exceptional at everything else, maybe. But there's a lot to be learned about Harold Fannin. And look, if he absolutely crushes that place, Lord knows the train will be honking its horn the whole way.
Yeah, you'll be honking something, won't you?
Yeah, Dick White.
Yeah.
Just said Ricardo.
Yeah. Is that
Ricardo,
what you call him?
from now
Is
on.
that what you call him? You know who I've been kind of thinking? When I think of Harold Fannin? A little bit
Jonnu
of a
Smith.
pull. Delaney Walker.
Yep, sure.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yep.
a little bit
Yeah.
undersized, a little bit like gadgety used at first, but then when he found his groove, he put up a couple 800, 1,000-yard seasons.
Yep, that's right.
So that's where I'm sitting on Harold
Delaney
Fannin.
is the Chigakonkwo comp, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, but Delaney ran before any of these, or Delaney walked so these guys could run. Is how
Oh,
it should be.
Delaney Walker so they could run her.
Yeah,
Delaney Walker is the Jonnu Smith of Chigakonkwo's tight end.
there it is. There it is. I love that. Yeah. It's
Thank you.
exactly what he is. Yeah, perfect player comp. We'll have to make sure we share that one out on Twitter. Really confuse the people.
Yes.
What do you think about these guys, Joe? Is Arroyo going to pop for you? You got another guy that's going to come off the list. What do you think?
I think it's a given post Senior Bowl that Arroyo is going to test well.
Yep.
So I think that we just need to accept the reality that Arroyo is going to be a top 3 or 4 tight end selected in this class. Should be noted that Colson Loveland is not going to be running. He had shoulder surgery, I guess, like a few weeks ago. So he is not going to be participating. The guy I'm most excited to see at the combine, and I'm just going to admit I'm an absolute homer's not the right word. I'm in the bag for Gunnar Helm, right?
Sounds kind of like it.
I really, really like him.
You and Chad Reuter.
Chad from Texas.
Chad from Texas. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want him to be super athletic. He skipped the Senior Bowl because I think he knows how important it is that he crushes the combine. His production basically matched Jatavian Sanders from 2023 this past season. He kind of stepped right into that role. So I was reading Scott Barrett's Analytics Darlings, and he actually touched on that exact same thing and basically said, well, is this a function of their offense and the role in that offense because Sanders didn't do a whole lot in his rookie year, or is Gunnar Helm just pretty good? He's also a slightly older prospect, etc., but I'm super excited about him. I mentioned he was on my Campus Cannon League, and he was just found money, and so that's why I love him so much. But I did watch some film, and dude, I think this guy kind of loves playing football the way Kittle does. And I
Talk
think
about Tucker Kraft.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So I'm excited about him, and I hope he tests well. If he doesn't, we can probably forget about him. But if he busts out a good spark score and relative athletic score, RAS score, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
if he tests well, then he can climb pretty damn high in my ranks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like Garner Helm as well, and um, yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of these guys aren't necessarily going to be those big speed score guys, right? Like I don't know if Helm's going to be Mason Taylor, Tyler Warren. I don't even know what he's going to look like athletically when he's running at the combine as well, right? And so um, I think that's going to be interesting, and that's kind of why I was
Very.
saying that guys like Arroyo and Fannin could stand out. I think if he was there, even Colson Loveland could have stood out as well. But I think like he's one of those guys that's kind of cemented in that kind of back of the first round. So I think it's fine that he's missing. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. There
I
is a
think I think
deep
it's I think
class
it's
of these
cool.
guys.
I think it's cool because
Yeah.
the running backs and the tight end, like the tight ends aren't fun to watch run, but their numbers so important that it's fun to watch them run. You know what I mean? You're like, oh my god,
Hmm.
4.62. All right, that's good enough for whatever the case. The wide receivers is pure sport. You're just like, who's going to be fast? It's just fun. You know, it doesn't
Yeah.
really matter for the analytics, but it's fun. And then the running backs are kind of both of those things. It's like it matters and it's fun. So yeah, I can't wait.
Hmm.
Yeah, Trav, you were talking about like the meat of the combine being on Saturday, and I don't disagree, but I'm going to be watching and very interested on Friday with these tight ends.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, that's it's just the amount of sheer positions. But yeah, the tight ends, there's a lot of them, right? Like you mentioned, Aronde Gadsden, there's Jake Brenningstool out there. Terrence Ferguson's a guy that you've
Mhm.
mentioned a couple times, Jax. There is an Iowa tight end, Luke Lachey. Wonder if he's related to Nick from 98
Yes.
Degrees.
Yeah.
Probably my favorite boy band ever. No big deal. Go ahead, Jax.
I was gonna. I don't remember. There'll probably be one cornerback I might peek at. I don't know. Just thinking about it.
What, Travis Hunter?
What?
The
Yeah.
elephant.
Ricardo White. Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll be watching Travis Hunter run too. That'll be fun. I mean, is he gonna
Yeah.
run?
I'm not exactly sure, but if he does, he's gonna be fast.
Should be fast. Better be
Yeah,
fast.
yeah, absolutely. If he plays fucking wide receiver, that'd be extra cool too.
Yeah.
Um, all right, guys, I think we can wrap on that. We did a little look at the tight ends. We looked at all the other positions. I think that was a really good little preview of the combine. Thanks to anybody listening. Really appreciate your support. Make sure you follow us on the social media. Check us out on all of those platforms. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also subscribe to Uncovered_NFL, our other channel that is coverage of NFL teams, real football, not so much fantasy, doing great work over there. Shout out to the boys. So yeah, fellas, now it's just time to watch and see what happens. Coming back next week, we're probably going to have a lot of fun stuff to talk about. So I always look forward to these sessions with you guys. So thank you for that. And again, thanks to the people. Until next time, we are out. Peace.